Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the report with me, Yasmin Khatun. On tonight's programme, we'll be taking a look at the migrant crisis in Europe as anti-migrant sentiment rises in Germany and at the killing of an infant in the West Bank by extremist Jewish settlers. But first, the Taliban have confirmed the death of their infamous leader, Mullah Omar. Following the announcement, a leader has been appointed to succeed him. I've been following developments. The Taliban has appointed Mullah Akhtar Mansour as successor to Mullah Omar, the founding leader of the group. It is thought that elections were held in Pakistan last night. The news emerged as the Taliban finally confirmed that Mullah Omar, as suggested by the government, was dead. The Taliban had only days earlier said the former leader was alive and leading the group, amid government reports and speculation over his death. Early this week, reports emerged that the Taliban leader had died in 2013, but none were confirmed amidst long-running rumours the rarely seen figure was in fact dead. Mullah Omar, who fought against the Soviet invasion, established the Taliban movement in Afghanistan's southern Kandahar province in 1994 and announced his Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan after capturing Kabul in 1996. Following the American invasion in 2001, Mullah Omar led the fight to re-establish his Islamic Emirates in the war-torn country. The Taliban were toppled from power by a US-led coalition following the 9/11 attacks. Mullah defiantly refused to give up Osama bin Laden, who had taken refuge in the country. Following the invasion, it's thought that Omar fled over the border to Pakistan. The Taliban have not specified where and when Mullah Omar died, but the long-awaited announcement has raised a number of questions. The loss of Mullah Omar is likely to cause divisions within Taliban ranks, with some senior figures opposing the newly appointed leader. The Afghan government is currently in amidst peace talks with the group in Kabul, but it looks like those peace talks might also be put to a halt. Joining me to discuss the story, Dr Mohammad Hotak from the British Afghan Chamber of Commerce and Industry and Akbar Ahmed, foreign correspondent for the Huffington Post. Thank you very much for joining us. Now, we've seen the appointment of a successor. This successor might have been around a lot longer than we seem to have found out now. What sort of changes do you think we'll be seeing?
I think the death of Mullah Omar has taken place in a very significant time. The most important issue at the moment was the peace talks that were taking place between Afghanistan and the Taliban, the government, and it seemed like there was an announcement on behalf of Mullah Omar who said that he supported the peace talks. But nonetheless, they have put another man in charge who, as you rightly reported, said in the report that he was his deputy and a former governor of Kandahar. So this guy has worked with Mullah Omar for a long time, and I think he will probably carry on with the strategy that Taliban
Why has there been so much secrecy over Mullah Omar's death? I mean, just days ago, it was thought that he was alive and leading the group. As you said, the negotiations have been running on the basis that Mullah Omar was a part of them. Why was that the case if he's been dead for what we think might have been up to 2 years?
I mean, it depends from which angle you look into this. If you look at it from a Taliban point of view, he was a spiritual leader, not just for Taliban. He had the title of the Amir al-Mu'minin, which meant he was the leader of all the Muslims. So I think it would have been a big psychological blow to the movement had it been disclosed before. But then on the other hand, the Afghanistan government, as they have always claimed that Pakistan supports the Taliban, and they didn't want to disclose certain information about where his whereabouts. And most likely, like recently, the former intelligence chief of Afghanistan said that Mullah Omar was a mythical figure, and it was just used by certain intelligence agencies to undermine Afghanistan's government.
Akbar, can I bring you in? What sort of a blow do you think this will be to the Taliban?
Well, just to pick up on the point you were saying about the Afghanistan government and this revelation now, it's important to remember that this blow, it's all linked to the idea of a splintering Taliban. Now, if there are elements within the Taliban who seem to have become more extreme and don't want to continue on this peace path, they have a lot to gain. So the Afghanistan intelligence seems to have almost preempted the verification by these extreme elements of the Taliban. They've been making comments for over the last 10 days saying, look, we know Mullah Omar is dead. Here's proof that he is dead. Because
I think we've lost Akbar for a moment there. Mohammed, if we could just come back to you before we try to reconnect from Akbar. As he was just saying, the Afghan government preempting almost, because this may lead to splintering, or we have already seen some splintering of the Taliban.
I mean, the Taliban already had different leaders, some who agreed to the peace talks, some who didn't. Even though there was Mullah Omar who was responsible for leading the organization, but nobody ever knew where he was or who he was most of the time as well. And these elements were actually in the Taliban movement, who probably wanted to have self-dependence or were going to,
almost elusive leader.
Yeah, so it would have been just like Akbar said, you know, good for their movement to attract more people, recruit more people. But a bigger challenge than the splintering of the Taliban is the new voice that we're hearing in Afghanistan, which I don't think is significant, but the Daesh movement, who have also been claiming that it would be probably a good news for them.
Let me just go back to Akbar. I think we've got you back on the line, Akbar.
Yeah. And on that point of Daesh or ISIS, that's important because the Taliban have connections also with Al-Qaeda. And we have to remember, looking beyond Afghanistan and Pakistan, there is a global battle for dominance right now between Al-Qaeda and ISIS. Where do the extremist sympathizers go? Now, Mullah Omar's death, someone who had pledged, you know, his loyalty to the Al-Qaeda central leadership in Pakistan, that's a big blow to the Al-Qaeda element and turns more recruits towards the ISIS element in Afghanistan, in South Asia, and that's scary. From the point of view of the Afghan government, they're saying, how do we find a negotiating partner who is willing to sit at this table? And the very interesting aspect of this, Yasmin, which you spoke about in your report, was that there was an announcement, reportedly from Mullah Omar, this month saying, I support the talks. If the Taliban leadership as it stands right now, if this guy Mansour, who has now been appointed and voted in, has to literally invent announcements from a leader who they presumably know is dead, that's not a very good sign. That looks like they're scrambling for control. And from a Kabul perspective, even from the perspective of the Pakistani government, which is really more open to peace talks than it's ever been, that's very scary.
Akbar, what do we know about Mansour? Do we have any information on him?
So we know, as was mentioned, he was former governor of Kandahar. He was a former aviation minister. One aspect I think has been interesting has been that Mullah Omar's family, his son, who's also quite high up in the Taliban, has been photographed with Mansour. That's a way of signaling, look, Mullah Omar's legacy is going to be continued through Mansour. And he certainly seems to be someone who would go along with the same path as Mullah Omar. It's important to note today, the Pakistani government, Pakistan's Foreign Office, announced that the talks had been postponed at the request of the Taliban. That suggests that the channels still exist, because the critical element here, Yasmin, is the Pakistani government being this interlocutor between the Afghan government and the Taliban. And if Mansour is an aspect of the Taliban who will work with the Pakistani government, that's great for the peace process. But if we get someone challengers to him who don't want to work with the Pakistanis, don't want to recognize the Kabul government, that's a challenge.
Okay, more on this splintering of the groups. I know Akbar, they're mentioning Daesh, you mentioning them also. What sort of an impact do we think it's now going to be taking place?
I mean, in Afghanistan, before Daesh, before Taliban, there has been factionalism in Afghanistan, and all these factions, obviously, most of the leaders of these organizations are not very well educated or people that would otherwise find followers, except to use violence and control things. So these factional leaders usually will try to gain power and have an income for themselves, which we know is mostly economically driven. But what's very important is I'm not really bothered about the number of factions that were there or will be there, whether it's Daesh or the Taliban or the Haqqani group or many other ones. The problem has always been, but most of the world has denied it, between Afghanistan and Pakistan. And President Ghani rightly said that if peace can be reached with Pakistan, peace can come to the region. And it seems like the Pakistani army, the intelligence agencies and the civilian governments are on the same page. So whoever is there, if they don't have Pakistan's support, I'm quite hopeful for the peace to come to the region. And I think the people of the region do need peace now. Millions of people have died in Afghanistan.
Akbar, talking about beyond Afghanistan's borders, what has been the reaction in the US?
It's certainly a concern. As you remember, NATO withdrew their mission at the end of 2014 and began a new support mission, not a combat mission. The US is going to be withdrawing its troops within a year and a half. And it's tough for American policymakers because the question they're facing is, we know the Taliban insurgency is much stronger than it's been in years, right? And President Ghani of Afghanistan successfully lobbied President Obama to keep more American troops. He wants more American troops to stay for longer. President Obama has said he's not going to budge on his hard deadline of I will remove all Americans by the end of 2016. What remains to be seen is, over the next 6 months, does this mean the situation in Afghanistan gets so much worse that the Americans have to break that promise and extend their mission even longer? So there's a lot of concern about that here in the US, Yasmin. There's also concern about this ISIS expansion. Sorry, just because one aspect of this has been the Taliban regaining territory. And ISIS is most successful in places where they can take territory, set up administration, and bring in recruits. They don't want Afghanistan to become that.
Do you think that is something that could happen now? I mean, it's left a bit of a vacuum, I guess, with the removal of such an iconic figure, you know, the man behind the Taliban. With this sort of removal, of course, we know that Al-Qaeda and the Taliban have long had links, especially with Osama bin Laden and Mullah Omar, even their family ties. But with the removal of both of those two figures, will there be a greater splintering of the groups and a more recruitment for groups like IS?
That certainly is a high possibility right now, and it's important also to remember Afghanistan's value as a nexus for a lot of these really extreme groups. So it's not just, you know, people from Pakistan coming in, people from Afghanistan. It's become a nexus for fighters, you know, who want to attack Xinjiang in China. It's become a nexus for people who are going. A lot of Afghan fighters have gone to Syria to support the regime of President Bashar Assad, and that's creating more instability too. So the sense of Afghanistan becoming another failed state, another place where conflicts between various proxies are played out, I think is very big. And that's why you see big global powers. People talk about Pakistan and talk about the US. China is very invested in what's going to happen in Afghanistan. You know, Russia is concerned. A lot of these places don't want this to become another nexus for ISIS or other groups to launch attacks elsewhere.
Mohammed, how will this impact the Taliban as a movement?
I mean, just like Akbar said, there is a lot of possibilities. He spoke about Afghans fighting for Bashar al-Assad's regime, and Taliban and different factions actually coming out in Afghanistan. But I think it then comes to state sponsors of these factions. If there is no states, countries that do not support any of these organizations, these militants, they will never be able to succeed. Of course, if there is support for whether it's Taliban, whether it's any other group. Recently, actually, there was news today that the Haqqani network leader has also been dead for about a year now. So whether it's Haqqani group or the IS or whoever it is, unless there is a state sponsor to these organizations, I don't think they can do much. And in the past in Afghanistan, there has been state sponsors of certain elements, and that's why they challenge the central government. But I hope that the region has realized that it's not just a threat for Afghanistan, it's a threat for everybody. So hopefully it would be a bad news for them.
Mohammed, earlier today I was listening to some reactions from the streets of Afghanistan, and some people were saying, well, actually, whether he's dead or alive, I feel the attacks are increasing, nothing's changing. What does this mean for everyday Afghans? You
know, this is the problem, that the everyday Afghans are actually really confused, and this is why I feel a lot of the pain, that regardless of what organization comes, what name they take, whether they're communists, they're the Islamists, or whether they're whoever they are, what happens is that then they kill innocent people. And millions and millions of Afghans, they're Muslims, and we are on an Islamic channel talking about this, and the world should know that millions of Afghans have died on the Pakistani-Afghan border, and it's enough. And what I don't understand is how could we have all these factions claiming to be Islamic organizations and fighting and killing more and more Muslims? And the people of Afghanistan are actually sick of the violence that has been there for not 1 year, 10 years, 20, 30. It's been going on now for generations, and it's enough. And I hope if there could be negotiations the way they're going forward between Pakistan, Afghanistan, and the regional governments, I think there is some hope for the people that some peace will come to the region. And I hope Daesh doesn't spoil all that, and I hope there could be some negotiations between Daesh and Syrian government as well. Yeah.
Akbar, just one final question now. Mullah Omar was a huge figure. What sort of an impact will this have in terms of the global jihadi movement and also the fight in combating this movement from the US?
It certainly goes back to the question of the global jihadi movement, Yasmin, because Al-Qaeda has not been vocal on this yet. And as you mentioned, there's close links there. Ayman al-Zawahiri has not made a comment. He's a leader who draws a lot of support from Afghanistan being the last battlefield, where really an Al-Qaeda proxy is powerful. You see Al-Qaeda in Yemen, but we aren't hearing as much about them right now. But it's a battlefield where he draws a lot of support. It's right next door to his central leadership. And he's got to be wondering, as is ISIS, his rival, wondering who is going to prove dominant here. I think the question is going to be monitoring jihadist websites, jihadist recruiters, to see what they're talking about. If they see the Mullah Omar death as a sign that, look, there is no way that this Al-Qaeda network, it's on its last legs. Now we have to turn to ISIS, turn to Daesh. That's a potential outcome, and that's a very scary outcome because, as we've seen, ISIS has used tactics that even Al-Qaeda finds too brutal, right? So if you see more people turning that way, it's a major risk.
Well, Akbar and Mohammed, thank you very much for joining us. That's all we have time for on this topic. We're going to take a short break now, but when we come back, we'll be taking a look at the rest of the day's news and what you've been saying on Twitter. See you after the break.